Welcome back to the Den. It's Porter here. We are a week away from some preseason action, meaning that it is time for you to absolutely lock in to your fantasy football drafts. And we know that rookies are such a fun component to these drafts. Just last year, guys like Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey, Brian Thomas Jr. all went very late in your drafts. And if you picked them up, you were pretty happy. So now that the dust has settled on the NFL draft and we are kicking things off with training camp, these are the 7 rookies that I find myself drafting the most due to their cost. And we're not going to have the big names on this list. You won't see Ashton Janty here or Amarian Hampton, 2 guys who are on pretty early in your drafts. We are looking more at some sleepers that you can get pretty much for free with a ton of upside towards the end of your fantasy drafts. So first on my list, we're going to start with the running back position here, and that's Brashard Smith. Brashard Smith gets drafted to the Chiefs in round 7, but he brings a really unique skill set to this backfield. So right now we still have Isaiah Pacheco leading the charge there in Kansas City, although he still didn't quite look like himself when he returned from his injury last year, which still may take some time for him to return to form. And even this week with training camp, he's getting, not made fun of, but there's some clips going around of him trying to run routes in practice, and he's not looking crisp. Well, very luckily, the Chiefs happened to draft Brashard Smith, who was a wide receiver at Miami before he converted to the running back position last year at SMU. And not only was he solid as a running back, he had an incredible year, especially with it being his very first season in the position. So in year 1 as a running back, he totaled almost 1,700 yards and 18 touchdowns. And he was very efficient on this as well, averaging almost 5.7 yards per carry. So I think he actually has some pretty good vision as a runner. But of course, with the receiver background, that's really where he can thrive in the NFL. And we saw just a few years ago, a guy like Jerick McKinnon was a league winner down the stretch because Patrick Mahomes was dumping it off to the running back, who was scoring several touchdowns during the fantasy playoff stretch. So if I had to bet on someone in this class to be a Tyrone Tracy from last year, it's definitely Brashard Smith. And of course, they have the obvious in common, which is that the 2 of them were receivers who converted to running back. But I actually like Brashard Smith a lot more as a runner, and I don't think he has the same fumbling problem that we're seeing Tyrone Tracy have in the NFL. And Brashard Smith, you're getting him in your draft for free. In redraft right now, according to Fantasy Pros, he is going as the 252nd pick, and that's RB73. So this isn't even a guy you necessarily even need to draft unless you have a very deep bench, but certainly someone that should be on your radar on waivers. But I think he's an excellent stash in this ambiguous backfield. And then from the Dynasty standpoint, about the same range. He's going around 262 overall, and that's RB75 in the Dynasty 1 quarterback format. So he, would drop even further in a super flex league. But I really do like the upside here. I expect Pacheco to still, be very solid. But if Brashard Smith can just find his way into that Jerick McKinnon role and then have a ton of upside if there's injuries around him, I think he has the skill set to be a good fantasy asset. And while the 7th round draft capital, we don't love to see that as a running back, this is the right organization for him. Isaiah Pacheco himself was a 7th round draft pick. So this regime with Andy Reid has really shown that they don't care about your draft capital. They care about what you're doing on the field. And when the front office was interviewed after picking Brashard Smith, they pretty much said that they did not have a day 3 grade on him. So someone clearly they had their eye on in earlier rounds. And the way with the strength of this draft class being the running back position, it seems like a lot of teams were really willing to wait because of the depth. They didn't feel a need to spend day 2 capital on running backs when you can get guys like Brashard Smith in round 7. So I'm locked in. Definitely someone I want to stash on my bench, especially in PPR leagues, knowing I think he should catch some passes. And if Isaiah Pacheco doesn't really look healthy, then Brashard Smith he has the skill set to be an every down running back. I know they also have Kareem Hunt there, who's in the twilight of his career, as well as Elijah Mitchell coming from San Francisco. But, he's had issues staying on the field. So why not Brashard Smith and let him kind of be a starting RB2, just like Tyrone Tracy was this past season. And sticking with the running back position, we're going to go to Houston with Texans RB Woody Marks. And very similar to Brashard Smith, the reason I love Woody Marks for fantasy is because of the pass catching profile. He wasn't the most effective runner over his collegiate career, but he dominated as a pass catcher. And his rookie season, which was at Mississippi, his freshman year at Mississippi State, he caught 83 passes in that offense. So he's always flashed, and he was the first USC running back to eclipse 1,000 yards this past year since Ronald Jones. So, not an offense typically that thrives with running the ball. So he showed that he is a solid runner, albeit not the best, but where he's really electric is with the ball in his hands. And I know that this now seems like a crowded running back room with Joe Mixon leading the charge, although he's starting training camp on the non-football injury list. So not exactly sure what's going on with Mixon. And they did just bring in Nick Chubb as well from Cleveland. But Woody Marks does not profile the same way that those two running backs do. So he can very easily carve out a role for himself despite being on a team with two much more established backs. I think Woody Marks was drafted to be the third down running back from the start. And Houston didn't just draft him, they traded up to go get him. They traded their 5th round pick in this past draft, as well as their 3rd round pick next year to go up into the 4th to draft Woody Marks. And as soon as that trade, came in during the NFL draft, I was so curious which running back it was going to be for. And I was pretty surprised it was Woody Marks, but it is starting to make sense to me based on who they have there. They got their depth in Nick Chubb. And this offensive line is going to be very bad. They let their best offensive lineman go in Laramie Tunsil. And I'm very concerned about what that pocket's going to look like. But that's perfect for Woody Marks, who can be on the field on 3rd downs and catch passes from CJ Stroud when he has no time to throw downfield to Nico Collins. So I think they gave up the draft capital to get Woody Marks for a reason. They wouldn't have made that move if there was no purpose behind this decision. And to me, I think he's a 3rd down running back with upside were there to be injuries to those older running backs. And again, he's pretty much free. In redraft leagues, according to Fantasy Pros, again, he's the 283rd overall pick at running back 85. And in Dynasty, he's valued a little bit higher at RB 82 with 274 overall as his ranking in 1 quarterback leagues. So I love him as a stash in Dynasty, really because of the trade, the move up that shows some commitment to Woody Marks from the front office. And there just is this role's available in this offense. I know Joe Mixon towards the end of last year was really starting to slow down. So I think they want to keep him fresh. So bringing a guy like Woody Marks to really handle some of that 3rd down work. And moving over to some tight ends, this is probably the most prolific prospect that we are going to talk about today. It was the Bears tight end Colston Loveland, where in Dynasty, he is the tight end 7 with number 65 ranking overall in a 1 quarterback league. But in redraft, he's going as tight end 17 around pick 137. And I don't understand why that is. So Colston Loveland is an absolute stud at the position, and he has the profile that you want for your fantasy tight ends, where he is known to be this good route runner and pass catcher. And he had a 28% target share this past season at Michigan, a very good catch rate, just a very reliable weapon. And I understand that the hesitancy with Loveland, there's a couple of things. So first of all, tight end's a position that takes time to develop. We've been spoiled at this position the last 2 seasons, with Brock Bowers being the overall tight end 1 last year and Laporta being the tight end 1 overall 2 seasons ago. Both of them doing that as rookies, which really just does not happen in fantasy. Usually these guys are not very usable in their rookie seasons. So I think that's the first knock on him. And then the second one is that he's going into this offense where there's this appearance of target competition, right? He's going into an offense that has DJ Moore, that just drafted Luther Burden, that's expecting a big breakout from Rome Odunze in year 2, and that already has Cole Kmet, a solid tight end on the roster. So there's too many mouths to feed there, so therefore he cannot be successful in fantasy. But to me, there's still a lot of ifs there. And when you're betting on him at tight end 17, you can be wrong. You can make that bet. Colston Loveland just not finish above that ADP, and you're not mad that you wasted that pick. But I still think there's a world where he could be the number 2 target earner on this team. He gets top 10 draft capital, the first draft pick of Ben Johnson's time in New York, and he chooses to add a tight end when he already has Cole Kmet on that team. And we know that tight ends that are drafted this high in the NFL draft typically hit. It's a pretty safe bet. I think it's the safest bet outside of your day 1 and day 2 running backs. These tight ends do very well when drafted this high in the NFL. And then we'll talk about Ben Johnson, who, talking about Sam Laporta and his rookie success, he did that under Ben Johnson. And with tight ends in fantasy, I think you're really looking for 2 things for them to be successful. The first is, can they be the number 2 target earner on their team? And so in some cases, if they're really efficient, being the 3rd target earner on their team can be respectable for fantasy as well. And then the second metric you really are hoping for is touchdowns. And that's why Sam Laporta finished as tight end 1 overall. It wasn't because of his receiving work. I mean, he still would have been a very good tight end, but he had 10 touchdowns in his rookie season. So that's what really uplifted him to tight end 1 status. And we saw last season when Laporta had some touchdown regression, he wasn't as usable in fantasy. He didn't build on that tight end 1 season. So with all the weapons that are there in Chicago, doesn't that just create more mismatches for this freak athlete tight end to take advantage of in the red zone? So that's where I see this going. So Ben Johnson, I think, will scheme him up in the red zone. So I feel good about the touchdowns. So the second question is just, can he be the number 2 target earner on his team? And if not, can he be number 3 and the touchdowns make up for it? And I think absolutely yes. We're expecting a year 2 breakout from Rome Odunze, but that's not a guarantee that that's going to happen. DJ Moore's there and is assumed to be the target leader for the 2nd year in a row, but DJ Moore's kind of had some issues in his NFL career. So who's to say that continues, that he doesn't take a step back, or Ben Johnson gets rid of him after some of the passive aggressive comments about his effort level. Don't necessarily want to make that the headline here, but anything can happen and situation changes so quickly. But to me, Loveland is talented enough in his own right. So if the only reason we're fading him and having him drop to tight end 17 is because of this perceived target competition, I'm taking that bet every time that he can outperform that. So if there's a rookie that I think can truly be a league-winning tight end, it's got to be Colston Loveland. So you're getting a huge discount based on his talent. And he's in a situation that I think is better than you think when it comes to the targets. And if for whatever reason you're missing out on Colston Loveland in your draft, then you're going to get this guy who is criminally underrated by his ADP, and that is Rams tight end Terrence Ferguson, another guy that you can get pretty much for free in redraft. He's going as tight end 38. So he's certainly not being drafted in your leagues. And in Dynasty, he's valued right now as a tight end 24, and I still think you should be buying him at that TE24 price point. But Terrence Ferguson had a very great relative athletic score of 9.32, and he actually ran the fastest 40-yard dash out of all tight ends. So we know that athleticism translates to the tight end position in the NFL, and Terrence Ferguson is one of the best in the class when it comes to that. And I know we were just talking about Sam Laporta. So, for example, for a little bit of a reference point, he had a 9.01 relative athletic score. So we've seen guys at that 9 mark be successful in the NFL, and Terrence Ferguson's, clearing that metric for us. And then take into account that he was hand selected by Sean McVay, who has a really good track record with the NFL draft. And they took him in the top 40 picks, which is still really good draft capital for a tight end. And in all of the interviews that McVay's done, because they traded out of the first round in the NFL draft just to pick up some additional assets. And they still took Terrence Ferguson. And McVay said that if they couldn't arrange a trade down that made sense for their team, Terrence Ferguson still would have been their pick in round 1. And you can kind of chop that up to coach speak, which, understandably so, but that is high praise from Sean McVay, who has actively been wanting a tight end, definitely dating back to last year where they tried to trade up to get Brock Bowers. So Sean McVay has had his eye on a young athletic tight end that he can make a centerpiece of this offense, and he finally gets his guy in Terrence Ferguson. So like we were just talking about, I mean, I don't think Ferguson has the case to be number 2 on this team in targets, because of course you have Puka and Davante Adams, but I don't see who would be outpacing him in targets after those 2 guys. So to me, I think he's going to be the very clear-cut number 3 option in this offense, and I'm just ready for that all to come to fruition, because that is certainly going to outperform what you're paying to get a guy like Terrence Ferguson. So this is one of the things, like in fantasy, sometimes it can be simplified to say you want guys that are drafted by good organizations because they're going to have a plan for them. And I trust Sean McVay. I trust Les Snead and this Rams front office that they finally were able to pull the trigger and get their tight end. And like we were saying with Loveland, I know that traditionally tight ends are going to take time to develop, so I'm all for that. But with the speed that Terrence Ferguson brings to this offense, I think they're going to really have fun finding creative ways to get him downfield. So he really could be a big play threat for this Rams team. And, Puka hasn't been the most reliable on the field in terms of his health. You don't want to bet on injuries. And then Davante Adams is really, he's 32 years old. So very well, health could be an issue there. So there is room for Ferguson to just have a role by default as a number 3 target. But if one of those 2 guys were to miss time, we're now looking at a player who is the number 2 target for Matthew Stafford in a Sean McVay offense. So I love Terrence Ferguson. And if I'm missing out on, like my top 12 tight ends in my fantasy football drafts this year, I love just throwing a dart on Terrence Ferguson for free with one of my last picks and just believing in the system, believing in the coach, the quarterback, and the player talent to all just put it together and be usable. Like, I see no world where Terrence Ferguson finishes tight end 38 or less. I just don't see it at all. I know Tyler Higbee's there, but I don't think Sean McVay takes Terrence Ferguson if he's not planning on having a bigger role from the jump. And moving on to the wide receivers, this is everybody's favorite sleeper. It is Kyle Williams, the Patriots wide receiver, a 3rd-round pick in the NFL draft. And boy, is he fun to watch. He has everything you want: good routes, good hands, explosive, twitchy, great personality, and he's walking into an excellent system, or an excellent opportunity for him, rather, to be potentially Drake May's number 1 receiver. Now, I don't think that's going to happen, but you could certainly make a case for it. But you're getting him in your redraft leagues at wide receiver 61, pick 153 overall. And in Dynasty, he's actually valued less. We'll talk about that in a second. But he's going as wide receiver 67 at pick 166 overall, according to Fantasy Pros. So Kyle Williams, the draft capital is tricky because round 3 wide receivers are really where the threshold starts hitting of how much is the team actually committed to this player, and that's where the hit rates really seem to drop. So my favorite example of a round three wide receiver is just from last season in Jalen McMillan, who was a league winner for you down the stretch of your fantasy football leagues if you were brave enough to start him every single week during his touchdown streak. And then this year they take Emeka Egbuka, and now McMillan kind of just falls to fourth in the pecking order just naturally. So despite proving himself as a rookie, proving he can play in the NFL and be an asset to his team, he still gets competition added. So that's definitely the fear with Kyle Williams from the dynasty standpoint. However, it's not the same situation, because even if the Patriots were to add more weapons to this offense next year, they still would need it. They don't already have established pieces around Kyle Williams. They do have Stephon Diggs, and I think Stephon Diggs is going to work primarily in the slot. Last season in Houston, he ran about, I think it was 64 or 74% of his snaps in the slot in that limited sample size in Houston before he tore the ACL. And last season for the Patriots, the targets were quite interesting. It was Hunter Henry who led the team with 97 targets. And then Demario Douglas was the second leader with 87. So unfortunately for Demario Douglas, he's the one that I think is really going to lose his role, because he thrives in the slot and is not much of an outside player. So I think Diggs is going to take that slot role. There's 87 targets right there for him to take. He'll probably get more than that. He'll probably clear 100 targets if he plays a full season. But that just opens things on the outside for Kyle Williams, because I don't think Demario Douglas will push him for snaps. I actually kind of like Kayshon Boutte, a good sleeper for a year 3 breakout, but he's not gonna be the true X alpha on this team. I think he's more of a complementary piece, but a guy who can still be good in the rotation, which really does open up Kyle Williams being the number one outside target for Drake May. And I am representing Drake May today. I got my Drake May shirt on, which I probably wear way too much, according to my wife. But love Drake May, love the opportunity that's here for Kyle Williams, and he should get peppered with targets on those deep throws, and that's something that Drake May is really good at. And Kyle Williams is already, I feel like he's kind of the talk of this week with training camp news. Like, he's getting so much love there out of New England from the beat reporters and the footage that's coming out from how he's doing in camp. Apparently he's burning people and like caught a ball on Christian Gonzalez. So it seems like he's living up to the hype. I know it's early, and lots of guys get elevated with their training camp performances, but I still really do love Kyle Williams, and there are targets to be had here. So again, it's just you're betting on him being better than wide receiver 61, which he certainly will be. I very much think he could be a flexible wide receiver pretty much every week once he hits his stride in the NFL. So a great stash. I do think Diggs is going to be the guy there and the target leader, but Williams should be number 2 or number 3. I still think Hunter Henry has a pretty solid role there too with his chemistry with May. But Kyle Williams, that round 3 pick is not the best track record, but in that range, I'm looking for a guy like Kyle Williams that I think can win on all 3 levels of the field, has a clear path here to being Drake May's number 1 target of the future. We'll see. Diggs is only brought in on a 1-year deal, so we'll see what happens here long term. But if Diggs retires after this year or goes somewhere else, again, this Kyle Williams, I don't see, like, 67 feels pretty low for his dynasty value as well. So I'm trying to get him everywhere I can, and truly I am trying. I'm not just saying that. In every draft I've had, I've aggressively tried to trade to spots to get Kyle Williams. I haven't been able to pull it off yet, so I will be taking him in all my redraft leagues, and we'll just go from there, and we'll victory lap that once that happens. And then we're going to talk about another round 3 NFL draft pick, and that's the Texans receiver Jalen Noel, who finds himself in Houston alongside his college teammate Jaden Higgins, who went in round 2. So they're really trying to revamp this receiving core in Houston after, really the Tank Dell injury, I think, made them want to get some really good depth on this team. But Jalen Noel, just like Kyle Williams, like, these were my 2 favorite receivers that went in round 3. I think they are just heads and shoulders above the rest of the guys that went there. And Jalen Noel to me is such a exciting player. And I think he's going to be the slot guy in Houston. So I know that's not a guarantee because they did just trade a 6th-round pick for Christian Kirk. But I think Jalen Noel is a better player than Christian Kirk is at this point of his career. And in all honesty, yes, Jaden Higgins has the better draft capital at pick 34. And you would assume that he'll be the number 2 on the team since he'll be playing mostly opposite from Nico Collins. But I think Jaden Higgins is kind of going to find himself in like the Michael Wilson role in Arizona, where like you're a pretty good boundary receiver. But early on, like I don't know how much he's going to get from a target perspective, with a lot of it going to Nico. Whereas I see Jalen Noel really thriving with CJ Stroud. We know Stroud loves to target the slot and likes to target deep, like he did with Tank Dell. And that's the role I see Noel filling into here. So if he can just beat out Christian Kirk, which we'll probably have some clarity on as the offseason progresses, I just love that role of this Houston offense. And kind of like we were saying with Woody Marks, this offensive line is not going to be good, which to me just elevates the role that Jalen Noel will have as being the slot receiver, probably playing a lot in the middle of the field, while Nico and Jaden Higgins are doing the work deep. So Jalen Noel could pretty quickly become CJ Stroud's favorite target in some of those pressure situations. So I guess, the way I envision it is, Nico Collins is getting the ball every play, but then on 3rd down when everything's collapsing, he's looking for Woody Marks or Jalen Noel. So I didn't even really put together that I'm making 2 Houston bets here in this with these takes here. But I really do like Jalen Noel, truly one of my favorite players before the NFL draft, just someone I really gravitated towards his skill set, his play strength. I mean, if you just watch the first play of Iowa State last year, he makes an insane catch like between 2 defenders and gets absolutely smashed and holds on to the ball. So he's just physical slot player. And I think he'll have the role that you want in this offense, despite having the worst draft capital out of him and Jaden Higgins. So I really like him, and I could see him being another player who's just very flexible in your lineup most weeks, and you're getting him for free. He's wide receiver 76 right now in redraft, 211th overall. And in Dynasty 1 quarterback leagues, he's picked 153 overall and wide receiver 65 according to Fantasy Pro. So just him and Kyle Williams, just 2 day 3 guys I love. Had to include them both on here. Just I want them in all my Dynasty leagues, and I'm fine stashing them in redraft as well. And of course, our final name to talk about here is Chargers wide receiver Trey Harris, who, like all those 2nd-round picks, finally signed his rookie contract. And he finds himself in an excellent situation in Los Angeles with Justin Herbert as his quarterback. And the only real person he'll have to be, Ladd's going to be the number 1, of course. But for him to just be number 2 on this team in targets, he has to beat out Quentin Johnston, who cannot catch the football. So I will bet all day that Trey Harris becomes the number 2 target in this offense. And we know in the golden days of early in Justin Herbert's career, he was putting up numbers on his own, but he's supporting like 2 elite fantasy wide receivers with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams there. And this seems like the second coming of that. The pick of Trey Harris was in the 2nd round of like the receivers who were going. We probably even the 1st round too. I think in those first 2 rounds of the NFL draft, Trey Harris was probably my favorite scheme fit. Just I love this pick by Harbaugh because you want someone who can stretch the field and open things up for Ladd in the middle. And that's what you're getting with Trey Harris. So Trey Harris led college football last year in his yards per game. I think he had like 100. It was 128 yards per game. He only played 8 games last season and finished with over 1,000 yards. So he absolutely thrives on getting deep and burning people and scoring touchdowns. So that can be a risky profile when guys are coming into the NFL, when you're not entirely sure Well, you want them to work on all levels of the field. You don't just want the guys who are only running goes. And we're kind of getting burnt with that profile. So it is hit or miss. So I will admit that, but I'm betting that Trey Harris hits. Last year, that was a knock on Brian Thomas Jr. was, oh, he's only running go balls. So he's just this deep threat. Is he a complete receiver in the NFL? And he proved that, yes, he is. And Trey Harris comes from Ole Miss, where I know you don't want to scout the college team. You want to scout the individual player. But Ole Miss kind of has a tendency to put out this type of prospect. A.J. Brown was very similar, where he had a pretty similar collegiate profile in terms of his route tree. And then same for DK Metcalf, who also has proven that he's a very good NFL player. And coming out of college, that was the concern of, oh, he's only used in this weird Ole Miss offense, and they're just throwing deep, and can he do anything else? So Trey Harris has that same question mark. And if you're saying, okay, well, the upside is he could be A.J. Brown or DK Metcalf, I think you're pretty happy getting him at wide receiver 61 in your redraft leagues. And he's valued at wide receiver 46 in Dynasty. So he's valued much higher in Dynasty compared to a lot of the other guys that we've talked about today. So people are high on his future. And then one fun thing about Trey Harris is just that he was a quarterback in high school. So I think he understands, and I'm saying this to address some of the red flags about what his route tree might look like. He understands the nuances of space and leverage, which is important when you're working in the short yardage game or you're trying to work in the intermediate areas of the field. So that's what I do like about Trey Harris is he'll probably think like a quarterback when given the opportunity, and he gets to pair up with Justin Herbert, who is just a football guy, and Trey Harris is a football guy, and they're going to love working together. Quentin Johnson isn't reliable, so I think if I'm Justin Herbert, I'm thinking, oh, here's a guy who in Trey Harris that is going to know where I need the ball to go because he was a quarterback. He was Malik Neighbors' high school quarterback, which is just so crazy to think about that they're now both in the NFL. So I'm all in on Trey Harris. Yes, you'll probably want to watch this one develop to just make sure Quentin Johnston isn't the clear number 2 there. I don't see why he would be. He wasn't drafted by Harbaugh. Trey Harris is. And it's just a match made in heaven. He can be the field stretcher, like the Mike Williams type. And then Ladd can get all the work in the middle and work his way outside, just like Keenan Allen did. So I think if Trey Harris hits, then you have a pretty great player on your fantasy team that you got pretty much for free. So what do you think? Do you agree with my players? Are you going to be drafting any of them? Or are you avoiding them at all costs in your leagues? Who did I miss? Who are your favorite rookie sleepers here that you're planning on drafting in 2025? If you like the content, please make sure you subscribe and like this video. It helps out the channel a lot, especially as a smaller channel that's just getting started. Really, every like, every comment, every view goes a really long way as we continue to grow. So glad football season's here, and I wish you the best, and I'll see you in the next one.